Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mayor Motley. Prime Minister Motley is the lead head with responsibility for the CSME within the CARICOM quasi-cabinet. We also have on the panel the CARICOM Secretary General, Ambassador Irwin LaRocque. A special welcome to the audience watching via the various television systems regionally and on the online platforms. You are also invited to participate via WhatsApp 1246-251-8847 with your questions and comments. Moving quickly along, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite the CARICOM Secretary General, Ambassador Irwin LaRocque, to give welcome remarks.
Thank you, Salas. Honorable Mayor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados and lead head with responsibility for the CARICOM single market and economy, members of Cabinet, members of Parliament, Dr. Warren Smith, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Professor Justin Robinson, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of the West Indies, Assistant Secretary General, Joseph Cox of the CARICOM Secretariat, and my other colleagues, members of the Diplomatic Corps, citizens of the Caribbean, members of the media. I welcome you here this evening to this town hall meeting. It's an excellent opportunity for us to have a discussion on matters relating to the CARICOM single market and economy. I also always welcome these occasions. I want to start by thanking Prime Minister Motley for prompting this initiative. And I must thank our hosts, of course, here at Cave Hill. There's no better place to hold this discussion than at a potent symbol of regional unity than the University of the West Indies. The theme for this evening is, what is in it for me? That's a question which I'm sure is on everybody's mind when we talk about the CSME. I have no doubt, personally, that regional integration, including the CSME and other programs, is the best platform for member states to achieve the objectives of sustainable growth and development, employment, and international competitiveness. From our point of view at the Secretariat, a lot of technical work is taking place. However, I'll be the first to acknowledge that when it comes to implementation, progress could be a lot better. And also, I must acknowledge that there's a shortage of public knowledge as to what has been done and what we are doing. Just very briefly to set the stage, the 5 regimes of the single market, namely free trade in goods, free trade in services, free movement of skilled nationals, the right to establish a business in any jurisdiction, and the movement of capital are in place and operating, although, again, I will admit, imperfectly and unevenly. We're doing work on contingent rights. That is the right that accrues to any beneficiary of the CSME when they move. You move to establish a business or to apply your trade. What rights do you enjoy when you enter that jurisdiction? We have recently approved a public procurement protocol, which is opening up the market for regional integration for trade in goods and services throughout the community. Another major development is the Multilateral Air Services Agreement, which should assist in getting better air transportation moving as we move forward. And in areas of skills, the heads of government very recently agreed to expand the list of skilled persons who can move to include agriculture workers and security workers. On the economic front, we are also working on credit reporting system that would allow for credit checks to be taken across jurisdictions and facilitate the raising of capital as well as the opening of accounts in other jurisdictions. And we're also going to be working on a single ICT space. I keep saying there's no reason why a phone call from Barbados to Georgetown and vice versa should be a long-distance call. And this is something that we've served notice on all the service providers, and we're very intent on doing that. The heads of government at their special meeting in Port of Spain last December set out a timetable for advancing these and other related issues of the CSME. We are here to engage with you in frank and open discussions, to share information and have an exchange of views that in the end will provide suggestions on how to accelerate our progress. And I would like you to bear 3 questions in mind. Is the focus of the CSME what we need, what needs to be done? Are we doing what needs to be done? Are we on the right track? And what can be done differently to be effective and impactful? We basically need your help in getting some of these through. You all form part of a constituency in your respective countries, in your respective organizations. And the more you know and the more you can assist in advocating for what you think we should be doing would help us a great deal. I recognize that time is short and we want to be able to hear from you. So I am going to wrap this up, but I also, in closing, want to thank the Caribbean Development Bank. The President is here with us and will address shortly. The CDB has been a faithful partner with us, not only on an event like this, but in many other crucial areas in terms of human resource development, in results-based management. I should mention it's another critical area we're working on so that we can be more accountable for the decisions we take and what we set out to do. I also want to express, and I see my friend in the audience, to express gratitude to the European Union, which also has provided much-needed resources over a series of years, over a series of EDFs, that has allowed us to do as much as we've done technically on the CSME. And I want to thank the European Commission. And of course, our friends from Canada and Spain have also been very supportive. So with these few words, I want to say thank you again, not just to the audiences here, but also the audience online, and look forward to interacting with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. I now call on the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Warren Smith, to give some remarks.
Thank you very much, Salas. Honorable Mia Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, and other ministers of government, His Excellency Irwin LaRocque, Secretary General of CARICOM, members of the Diplomatic Corps, other distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Let me start by commending Prime Minister Motley for spearheading this very timely initiative. Last year, while attending your first intersessional heads of government meeting as Prime Minister, you declared your government's unequivocal commitment to the regional integration cause and Barbados' readiness to play a full and active part in moving the process forward. I make bold to say that you have been relentless in your quest, and over the last 12 months, you have injected a new energy in the movement towards the CARICOM single market and economy. Colleagues, the architects of our regional experiment envisaged a Caribbean community working as a unified and collective grouping to promote economic integration and cooperation amongst its members, so that the benefits of integration could be equitably shared. They also foresaw our region becoming a more competitive force in the global arena by pooling resources so that we could take greater advantage of opportunities that would normally be inaccessible to small island developing states operating separately. The CSME was therefore conceptualized to create a larger marketplace, thereby augmenting economies of scale and ultimately melding these small nations into a competitive force in the global arena. Even as we ask the question, what's in it for me, we must remember that for us to realize our full potential, our focus has to be on a regional approach that will enable Caribbean economies to become more competitive and viable on the global stage. I think President Obama put it well when he declared to his American audience that we, the people, recognize that we have responsibilities as well as rights, that our destinies are bound together, that a freedom which only asks, what is in it for me, a freedom without a commitment to others, a freedom without love or charity or duty or patriotism, is unworthy of our founding ideals and those who died in their defense. So as we engage in this discourse this evening, let us also seize the opportunity to generate new ideas that can make the CSME a living reality for our citizenry. What, ladies and gentlemen, therefore, is the imperative that should be driving us in this direction? In addition to our commitment to pursue a regional approach to our socioeconomic development, CARICOM countries have each subscribed to the Sustainable Development Agenda. The appeal of this agenda is the promise to end poverty, to achieve a level of human development that is fair and inclusive, and to make possible a sustainable future for all of our people by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a simple decade away from that milestone. The imperative for the Caribbean community is very clear. The successful completion of the agenda within the time frame demands that every CARICOM country embarks on an accelerated process of economic transformation. And our focus must be on becoming an internationally competitive trading bloc. There is an urgency, therefore, for us to accelerate the regional integration movement through the completion of the single market. That urgency is underscored by the worrisome shift towards inward-looking policies and a retreat from multilateralism and globalization in some parts of Europe and in the United States of America, which are traditional trading partners of CARICOM. We at the Caribbean Development Bank are convinced that the CSME is our best bet for unlocking the economic growth potential of CARICOM countries and enhancing the prospects for greater prosperity for our people. We would do well, in my view, to take heed of Benjamin Franklin's injunction that we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall all hang separately. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. It now gives me great pleasure to invite the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mayor Motley, to give remarks. Prime Minister Motley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Secretary General of our distinguished Caribbean community, members of Cabinet, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of staff of the CARICOM Secretariat, members of the University of the West Indies, and in particular our host, I believe, Professor Robinson, you are hosting us this evening in the absence of Professor Barreto. And ladies and gentlemen, all CARICOM citizens through the benefit of technology, or should I say people of the Caribbean. This is a moment that I hope will be recalled in the future, because it is only through engagement such as this that we are going to build the momentum that is necessary for us to be able to see forward progress on the part of our Caribbean community. I don't know what else is necessary to prove that it is absolutely urgent. Head of the private sector, CARICOM private sector, I'm sorry, I apologize. Perhaps if you were in the limelight, then I would have seen him earlier. I don't know what else is going to be necessary. The climate crisis has already proven to us that not language nor sea can separate us from the fate of the climate crisis. We have also recognized that in our negotiations with Europe, language is not the determinant as to the development trajectory or the trade implications for that entity. And it becomes necessary, therefore, for us to ask ourselves, in whose interests shall we act? Shall we act in the interests of that average Caribbean citizen, so brilliantly reflected in the speech of the Right Excellent Errol Barrow at Georgetown, when he spelt out the bonds that connect us that are incapable of being broken even by bureaucracy? Or shall we ignore his words and continue to believe that we can do it alone because we have something called an Independence Day? The bottom line is that we continue to face threats economically, socially, governance, in terms of our governance and in terms of our environment, that make it very, very difficult for us to plan out our future together. I walked with this phone for one reason and one reason alone. And it is perhaps interesting that the president of the Caribbean Development Bank spoke before I did. And it is because his chief economist did an exercise a few weeks ago that ought to be the most sobering exercise for all of us within the Caribbean region. And I liken that exercise to the graph done by my minister in the Ministry of Finance with respect to Barbados's current account deficit over a 52-year period in which we had surpluses only on 5 occasions, and then a decade after so deficit, only on 5 occasions, and then a deficit for 10 straight years, making it absolutely clear what path we had to travel as a nation. I would like this speech by Dr. Ram to inform the people of the Caribbean as to why it is absolutely critical to take action today. And what am I referring to? The projections that in 2050, other than those on the South American continent of our brothers and sisters, that the rest of us will fall essentially to constitute one of the poorest performing regions in the entire world with respect to GDP growth and per capita income. Now, how do we come to accept that since the 1980s, our growth has literally fallen below that of other major regions, and that others have come to use the very same technology that we have to leapfrog us? That in Africa, Kenyans can do their business through digital money, and that those who may be cut off by large and long distances are now not cut off with respect to their ability to bring produce to market because of the technology. How do we come to accept that we will continue to have a situation where we have surplus liquidity within this region, but those businesses within the productive sector, small, medium, large, or even nano, have difficulty in accessing funds in the region? How do we believe that our citizens will continue to believe that it can be business as usual to have to file new documents in each territory to form a company or to do business in Suriname, in Guyana, in St. Vincent, in Grenada, in St. Lucia, in Barbados, in Jamaica, in Belize? At what point do we agree that there has to be the description of claimed ground? We met in December in Port of Spain, and we settled on the St. Anne's Declaration, recognizing that unless we can have appreciable progress on a number of issues, the prospect of us not being able to sustain movement within CARICOM as reflected as a potential outcome in the Golding Report may become one of our realities. We determined in Port of Spain that this was worth fighting for. But it is no use heads of government determining that this is worth fighting for if the people of the region are left out of the equation. And one of the things that concerns me is that over the course of the next 15 months, we will have about 8 general elections within the Caribbean, and therefore the pace and progress of the implementation not only of the single market and single economy, but of other aspects of our integration movement will come to be put under pressure because of the domestic realities. Now, the sustainability of an integration movement ought not to depend on whether a domestic election is being held or not. And it is one of those issues that we will have to come to grips with in terms of reforming our integration movement. Secondly, in Europe, almost every, maybe because of Brexit we've seen it, but almost every 2 or 3 weeks, the heads of government of the European Movement Union are meeting. But we believe that a smaller group of people needs to meet only twice a year. And what happens in between the 2 meetings then depends on what happens at the subcommittee level, or potentially if there is a crisis. That, in my view, has to change if we are going to bring our movement into fully the 3rd decade of the 21st century, which in fact starts in less than 60 days. Similarly, we have to determine, can we continue only to telegraph the decisions of the heads of government without allowing you to be able to participate or to hear more what is being discussed at the level of the integration movement on an ongoing basis? These are some of the questions we must ask ourselves, but what you must ask yourself as individual citizens. Can I survive and thrive in a Caribbean where my country is trying to do it alone, or where my unit of countries is doing it alone? I want to suggest to you that what is in it for you is everything. Because your ability to be able to fight off the worst impacts of climate crisis depends on us coming together as one and raising our voice, and even then, there is no guarantee. Your ability to have a larger market will be critical if you're going to drive down your prices and to be able to enhance your competitiveness to allow for greater profitability. Your ability to be able for us to have the levels of functional cooperation that have been quietly working for us without any big set of noise, as we have seen with CXC, as we have seen in other areas of public health and in the testing of our labs. These things are working for us. But for some reason, we don't believe that if we are stronger together there, that we can also be stronger together in the context of the single market and the single economy. Our ability to work together with our external trade negotiations and our development trajectory is absolutely critical. So without further ado, because this evening must be not about rhetoric, but about us answering your questions, because as the Secretary General said this morning, not only do we need you, I put it differently, and those in Barbados will forgive me for the phrase, but I will say to the people of the Caribbean, all aboard. Because unless you get on board, we are not going to be able to avoid a 2050 that may see us, 1, delivering climate refugees to the world, and 2, having one of the poorest levels of economic performance of any region in the world. Not because pound for pound we are not better, because we have produced more Nobel laureates in this region, pound for pound, square mile for square mile. We have produced greater excellence in sports and cultural creativity. We've produced it even in the internet, as Cave Hill just recognized in the conferring of the honorary doctorate on Alan Emptage. We've done it. But why do we believe we must continue to do these things singularly without understanding that the power of unity is not only that of the unions to benefit from, but it is for the Caribbean people who, more than any other region, reflect people from every civilization on this earth, every race on this earth. And we have come together to fashion a civilization that is blended, but is of us, and has a greater level of creativity without the bloodshed that other regions in the world have seen. I say to the young people in particular of this region that it is yours to claim. And for the record, we do not have enough people to build out our economy to do what has to be done. But that will be a discussion we'll have during the course of the evening. Let the discussions start. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Motley. And when we come back from the break, we'll go straight into the comments, questions, answers, and reminding viewers online and via the various television systems throughout the Caribbean to contact us via WhatsApp. So we'll now take a break and we'll be right back.
Every day across the Caribbean, non-food goods made locally, regionally, and internationally make their way into the hands of consumers. And from time to time, some of those goods may be defective and might actually cause harm. The CARICOM Rapid Alert System for the Exchange of Information on Dangerous Non-Food Consumer Goods, CAREX, has been set up to protect you. If you receive dangerous goods, you can file a complaint with your local CAREX contact point, or you can log on to www.carex.caricom.org and fill out the online form. The relevant agency will investigate, and once that is complete, the CAREX system will alert other countries in the region so that consumers will be protected from goods that pose a serious risk. For more information and to see the categories of goods covered under the system, visit www.carex.caricom.org or contact your local CAREX contact point. The CARICOM Single Market and Economy. Make it work for you.
We believe that the Goddard Group of companies, like several others that operate within the Caribbean region, will have an opportunity through the CARICOM Competition Commission to have cases which come up related to trade heard and adjudicated in a timely fashion. We believe that it will help to equalize trade amongst various CARICOM countries, and that gives us an opportunity to expand our business in a way that would help us to improve our base.
Individuals and businesses within the CSME have the right to take their cross-border competitive issues to their governments for submission to the CARICOM Competition Commission.
CARICOM Single Market and Economy, opportunity for you and me.
Welcome back to What's in It for Me, for You, this town hall session with the Honorable Prime Minister Mayor Motley and the CARICOM Secretary General, and of course the online and television audience. You're invited to engage via the WhatsApp number 1246 251 8847. The audience, the Prime Minister said, it's about conversation and hearing from you this evening, and I hope you will so react. I don't wish to be speaking and begging for your questions and comments on the CARICOM Single Market and Economy. There are microphones roving. Once you put up your hand and you indicate that you wish to, yes, I see one right there at the back. Once you put up your hand and indicate that you wish to engage, we will so let you speak. Just identify, and if you're representing an organization, please say so. Thank you, sir.
My name is Charles Mongery. I'm a graduate of the university management degree, and I'm retired. I have a concern about the thousands of graduates that are coming out of the three, well, let's say 4 universities, and it's 5 now, and the Barbados Community College being able to find a job. Because sometimes you hear that a person has been looking for a job for the last 6 or 7 months and they haven't been able to find a job. Let's say that I am a graduate that came out with a degree in engineering, a doctor, engineer, whatever, and I couldn't find a job for the last 7 months. And somebody told me on advice, if you want to try to see if you could get a job in one of the other Caribbean islands, that you should go to the Caribbean Community Secretariat. When I was doing the reading through the CSME, I saw 2 words called labor intelligence. And what I want to know is, if I go to the Caribbean Community Secretariat, would they be able to, using the labor intelligence, be able to tell me the chances or the probability of me being able to get a job doing engineering in one of the other Caribbean islands, if they have shortages, or if they have saturation, or my chances right now are not very good of being able to get a job in the Caribbean region now, and my best chance of being able to get a job doing engineering is to go to try the Canada. They're looking for skilled immigrants in many industries.
Thank you very much, sir. I suspect you are referring to the LMIS, the Labor Market Information System, on the CARICOM Secretariat website. I'll pass the question over to the Secretary General.
Thanks, Salas, and thank you very much. As Salas has mentioned, the Labor Market Information System is a tool that we're developing that in fact will indeed do what you said. It will list where opportunities are for certain skills so that persons and work so that persons could move, because the whole idea behind this is that you need information as to where you can apply your trade, where you can apply your skills. So the answer is yes. I don't think we're going to be putting stuff on there on where to get jobs in Canada or elsewhere. I'm not aware that that's what we're doing, but certainly in terms of opportunities being available in our region, the Labor Market Information System will be addressing that. Yes, it will of course involve the information, the database being populated by the member states, and you'll be able to log on and see where the opportunities are.
Okay, so how soon will that website be available that graduates would be able to access that information?
I'm looking at my colleagues for a date.
Let me help you, SG. Yes. Let me help the gentleman, please. Yes, when the SG does that, that gives you a 1, 2, 3 ABC step. But the truth is that every country has information now almost available on the internet. Everybody's newspapers are on the internet. If people really want to find information for jobs, the information is accessible. I applaud this CARICOM Secretariat for being and desiring to make it available in a very user-friendly format. But the truth is that if I was looking for a job and I'm an engineer, what is the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to go and look at those industries that are appropriate to my jobs, my skill set. I'm going to see which country has them, and I'm going to go and see whether those countries, those companies are looking for people. Now, the bottom line is that you, not you, sir, but the Caribbean people have the comfort of knowing that they can move so long as their country is signatory to the CSME, and they have that degree as an engineer or other skill sets that are recognized by the skills that the heads have agreed to, they can go and move. And one of the things that I think that is even more important than the labor market information system, therefore, is the readily available news on a daily basis as to what is happening in each Caribbean territory. And I think that separate on a parallel track, if we can get that flow of information, and I know the SG has been working on it with yourself and others from my office and the rest of the region. But I feel that we need to start and do it. So if we can find 1 or 2 countries in the region that are willing to take a 15-minute package from the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, my office will facilitate it just to prove that it can be done. But it is in that information flowing that people's interests are piqued. All of a sudden, we know that the refinery in Trinidad and Tobago is going to be purchased by whom? OWTU. With what? A guarantee by whom? The government of Trinidad and Tobago. So those who felt that there would have been no refinery 6 months ago are now in a position to know that there will be one. But that flow of information from country to country, well, why is it that I know what is going on in Iowa more than I know what is going on here? And in Iowa there's a lot of campaigning going on. But why is that more immediately available to us, or the British elections on the 12th of December, than what is happening in Trinidad or Jamaica or Grenada or St. Lucia?
I will take also online. I have about 5 lined up here. How will CARICOM heads resolve issues around some members wanting to be treated differently, like the LDCs?
I think let us get it straight. In an integration movement, there will be winners and there will be losers. And we have to have a balancing mechanism with respect to those who are losing and those who are winning. Those who drafted the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and regrettably I'm old enough to remember when it was being drafted and when we were sending people to the meetings, we understood that there needed to be something that would give comfort to the smaller countries of the region, that their economies and their societies would not be overwhelmed by the larger entities within the region, particularly since in many instances the larger countries were the ones that were not performing as strongly economically at that time as some of them may be now, and the coins have flipped. Guyana is likely to proceed with growth at an astronomical rate because of what has happened there with the fossil fuel exploration. Jamaica has come out of an IMF program that has been led consistently by both governments, and hence will, for the first time in decades, turn the corner, we believe, on a consistent path of growth. Now, at the time when we settled the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the smaller islands of the region were growing at a more rapid rate than the larger countries. But the capacity for them to be able to absorb was always something that they were worried about. And obviously, the growth and the equity within the jurisdiction was uneven. So Chapter 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas gave those disadvantaged countries, sectors, and regions, because we recognize that even the older categorization of MDCs and LDCs might not be adequate to be able to appropriately allocate resources and benefits within the context of the integration movement. And hence, therefore, Chapter 7 has become absolutely critical for the future viability and success of CARICOM. Now, here's the problem. When the Regional Development Fund was established, it was contemplated that we would see far more support by the international community than we've seen. Similarly, it was also contemplated that the MDCs might have been in a better position to capitalize than they have been. Regrettably, that has not been the case. And we have had, even in our own country, Barbados became, what's the word I want? Barbados did not pay its dues on time. And in spite of the fact that we're in an IMF program, we are regularizing that now as a matter of urgency because we understand the worthiness of the philosophy behind Chapter 7. But what we have formally put on the table for the last couple of months, better part of a year, is that we need to change the charter, if possible, the statute establishing the CARICOM Development Fund, have a growth and resilience fund, look at the Caribbean Development Bank if it is something that they are interested in, to work in conjunction with the CARICOM Development Fund, to help us be able to attract the capital from the domestic savings. We have been told that there is about $50 billion in savings in the region. Now, even if only 3% of that, 2.5% of that comes, that is $1.25 billion. It is certainly far more than the Regional Development Fund is now managing. And to that extent, therefore, if we can offer the people of the region a savings rate that is more than 10 times what they're getting from the commercial banks are paying at 0.2% and 0.1%. You offer people on pension funds and other entities 2.5%, and then you on lend to others 3.5%. I'm not going to 4.8 or 5 as CDB, and those are discussions that we'll have separately. But what it does is that it allows us to be able to build out the disadvantaged sectors and regions and countries in a way that Chapter 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas understood. So I believe that there is a viable case. I do, however, believe that if we are only going to depend on ourselves, we are not going to be able to find sufficient capital in terms of governments doing it. But if we look at our populations and our companies and put a good business case to them in terms of rate of return on their investment, that there's a case to be made, and that once we start doing that, it allows us then to, with greater credibility and strength, to go to the international community, particularly on the resilience bonds. Because we make the point over and over that while we are on the front line of the climate crisis, our behavior did not put us there. And it was the behavior of the developed world that has put us there, and hence the conversation that the developed world has had on the Warsaw Mechanism for Loss and Damage to be able to compensate those countries that have suffered as a result of the behavior of others in a climate crisis ought now to be put fully on the table. But people will only help those who help themselves. And hence, this discussion has to be real and live and quick.
Thanks. I have 5 waiting online before I come to you. I'll take one more. How will free trade articles 80 to 100 of the Treaty of Chaguaramas affect local agriculture and manufacturing given our higher currency? And that question is coming from St. Lucia.
The gentleman or lady in St. Lucia must know that I had cause recently to go to Article 43 and to begin to look at how sometimes in a country's economy you may have to take defensive action, to look at some forms of import substitution in order to be able to stabilize aspects of your macroeconomic performance as you go forward. The bottom line is that the Caribbean has to have, and let's deal with the international community first, with international trade agreements. Regrettably, the world has not taken us seriously with respect to that type of protection that we need to protect our agricultural production. And whether it is in the formation of the GATS or the WTO or all of these other issues, the developed world of the West have found ways to protect their agricultural production and manufacturing. Our voices have been too soft and our presence too distant for us to have benefited in the same way. And therefore, one of the things that we need to be able to do is to use aspects of the climate crisis to be able to strengthen our argument with respect to why food security is critical and why at all costs we must be able, and I use this as the first example. So a hurricane doesn't hit every country in the region at the same time, but it can disrupt food supply in the region. And we saw it as recent as this year. If we are not in a position to provide for our own food as islands for the week or 2 weeks that it may take to be able to bring food to the country, what do you have but a national security crisis? And therefore, the Caribbean has to start articulating differently. And it is one of the reasons, quite frankly, why Barbados eventually agreed that we needed to have UNCTAD in the region to start the sensitization on trade and development issues and discussion among our populations, and to begin to galvanize the kind of discussion and conversation and numbers with respect to people who understand that, look, this is no longer an issue of dollars and cents. This is an issue of can a country survive and keep itself stable with respect to access to food if it is cut off. Now, at the other point, you then look at intra-regional CARICOM trade. And the truth is that I'm not sure that we have done the best job at production integration, but it is something that we want to do. And that is why, Secretary General, I believe that yourself and the then chair of CARICOM, Prime Minister Harris, agreed that the private sector and the labor movement should be brought to the table, and that we should begin to start the conversations with them to allow for production integration. Now, it may well be that within the context of our individual countries, we have macroeconomic difficulties that may still require us to protect aspects of our balance of payments within the context of the movement of the single economy within the region. But without prejudice to that, we need to be able to fight the battles externally. And that means an integrated trade discussion and integrated trade negotiations. So that the treaty, in my view, doesn't give us perfection, but it does allow, in some instances, the protection of critical industries within the economy of our individual countries, because we recognize first and foremost, as do all international trade agreements, that there must be the survival of the sovereign entity. And if there can be no survival of the nation state, then there is no need for an international trade agreement. That is why we protect things on the basis of national security, public health, balance of payments, and macroeconomic stability, and the one that is more vai-qui-vai, public morality.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And that gentleman seated next to Ambassador Chamacheri, please. The mic is covered.
Good night. Thank Madam.
It's on.
Madam Prime Minister, my colleagues across the Caribbean in the independent consumer associations tell me to remind you and your colleagues in government of President Kennedy's famous speech to Congress in 1962, March 15th to be exact, that states in part, if consumers are offered inferior products, if prices are exorbitant, if drugs are unsafe or worthless, if the consumer is unable to choose on an informed basis, then his dollar is wasted. His health and safety may be threatened, and the national interest suffers. President Kennedy went on to say, if the federal government is to meet its responsibility to consumers in the exercise of their rights, additional legislation and administrative action is required. We know that in Chapter 8, Article 184 and 185, we talk about consumer protection and the rights of consumers in the revised treaty. Yet, There are many states in the Caribbean, including St. Lucia, my home country, which has passed legislation but has refused or are unable to commence it, Madam Prime Minister. And we want to say that to you, that basically, when we see the first ad here tonight was CARIC, to come and tell them about what CARIC is doing, yet in St. Lucia, there are stores that have no refunds. The same exists in other islands. And therefore, we are not protecting our consumers, who are in the main, the majority of voters. All of us are consumers. I will put my other cap on, Madam Prime Minister, that of a cooperator, and say that I'm a supporter, an advocate, proponent of the United Nations resolution of 2009 that stated in part that the best business model to generate employment and alleviate poverty is a consumer business model. Yet we do not see CARICOM governments promoting and pushing cooperative education for cooperative development within the shores. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm assuming you are Mr. Kingsley St. Hill? Yes. You are from the National Consumer Association in St. Lucia. Very much. Just reminding that we have about 6 more persons in the audience. You want to take one more question first?
No, I can answer very quickly because my head is tired tonight. Mr. St. Hill, Kingsley, let me say that half the problem, part of it people may feel is political will, but it isn't really only political will, because there is no Prime Minister I know that will not want seriously to pass consumer protection legislation. But the real problem in the region is a capacity issue. And I speak as a former Attorney General. I have my Attorney General here. We know that we have a chronic shortage of draftsmen in the region. We know that it is something that has to be dealt with. It's unsexy, but if we don't deal with it, and the SG knows that I feel strongly that we may have to put a regional law reform commission. In Barbados' own case, we launched on Friday afternoon a national law reform commission. And even with the difficult fiscal situation that we're in, they recognize that it's part-time for now. Eventually, it really ought to be full-time. But we need to be able to bring our economies, our societies, our countries into the 21st century. How many countries in the Caribbean you feel have an unfair contract terms act? Now, you asked me about consumer protection because that's what most people will jump to. But I want to tell you that in my view, the more urgent piece of legislation for all of us is an unfair contract terms act, because it starts to right-size the disproportionate power between banks and insurance companies and the other large entities and the consumer. And the most consumer protection legislation relates to goods and not services. So, short answer, I think that we have to be serious about restructuring aspects of the CARICOM Secretariat and being able to have the Secretariat function in the 21st century. Not only with more regular meetings of heads of government or of officers, the political will comes in making sure that people come to the meetings, whether flying or by Zoom or Skype. No, because that allows us to talk every week if we wanted to. So we need to be able to restructure the governance framework of the Secretariat to allow it to be more effective in meeting our individual domestic needs. The most important thing about CARICOM is what? It's functional cooperation. And a lot of the functional cooperation that we have, people take for granted. Now, there are other areas in which the functional cooperation can be far greater. Civil aviation, wider aspects of education, wider aspects of healthcare, wider aspects of consumer protection. I feel strongly, and I'm waiting for it to happen, that none of us as individual countries can afford a financial services commission or a regional competition commission, because what are we doing? We're all paying for the same entity, can't afford to pay properly, not attracting at the levels that we should be attracting. And the lesson of the Caribbean Court of Justice is there for us. The Caribbean Court of Justice is one entity. It has national jurisdiction and it has regional jurisdiction. When we established it, and I know because I was chairing, we agreed that everybody would pay the same unitary amount, so that for that court to become the appellate court of other countries in the region does not cost them not a cent more. Secondly, it is there, however, to be able to interpret aspects of our treaty, revised Treaty of Chaguaramas economically. And as I said to the SG, in my view, the one missing part of the equation that we need to settle and settle urgently, and Dr. Berry is in the audience, is a CARICOM human rights treaty. At best, we have a charter of civil society that is not justiciable. But if we don't treat to the social justice issues or the human rights issues of our population, then people will begin to believe that CARICOM is only about business people and the economy, when in truth and in fact, the community of sovereign states that we've established has effective functional cooperation more in social areas than probably economic areas.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Good evening, Honorable Prime Minister, SG, Dr. Warren Smith, and protocol already established. My name is Dr. Olivia Smith, former Deputy Program Manager, Free Movement and Labor, CSME, lecturer, and I just wish to add a few points. I'm of the view that a labor market impact assessment needs to be done so manpower planning can be properly undertaken in each member state and sectors can identify their needs. And this is not only for the employers but for employees. It also does away with the notion that people are going to overrun my country because we understand what our needs are as states. That's one. I'm picking up also on the point the gentleman made about the labor market information system. I'm happy to hear that progress has continued on the LMIS. It is absolutely necessary. With respect to people moving and facilitating them, employers are very much sometimes not understanding the equivalency of the qualifications of persons coming from other member states. There's a CARICOM qualification framework, and that needs to be shared with the public. So an employer understands a person coming from another country with a certification, what is the equivalency? We've seen in the case sometimes of Trinidad and Guyana, you have people coming from the University of Guyana going to Trinidad to do a job. They get difficulty because the employer will say, we don't understand the equivalency of the qualification. Sometimes you have the body, the professional body, accepting the qualification and the accreditation council in that particular country not accepting it. That needs to be fixed. All CARICOM nationals need to be aware that outside of the 10 categories of persons, if you move from country to country, your social security is portable. There is a reciprocal agreement, and whichever country you reside in, you can move your social security. With respect to skilled persons and right of establishment, persons moving and having indefinite stay, there's an issue on the ground. Continuously, the banks and the credit unions say, what does indefinite stay mean? Is it equivalent to permanent residence or citizenship? I am therefore not comfortable giving loans to people that I don't understand their status. We need to fix what indefinite stay is supposed to be equated to. With respect to persons who are skilled nationals who come with their skill certificates, a lot of persons are forgetting after going to the accreditation council, they need to go to the immigration department so that that part of the process is done. You're hearing people saying, well, I was trying to get my children in school, I couldn't. It is because you haven't gone to immigration. You have to go to the immigration department so the indefinite stay is given to you. With respect to the movement of artisans, domestic workers, and these people, not every person in these categories are really able to uptake the Caribbean vocational qualifications. It requires portfolio and so. CARICOM had approved a prior learning and assessment process. Maybe we can go back to looking at that so people can present themselves at an assessment center, get their certification, and move. With respect to the right of persons, a lot of people are experiencing exploitation, sexual and labor. Maybe on your Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, you can put the information, like a national referral directory, where people can go for help and services. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. Let me only say this. As I said earlier, that the truth is that CARICOM has to come to grips with the fact that, contrary to what people believe, we are not overpopulated. And that more than anything else, we actually do need people to build out our economies. From Guyana and Suriname in the south to Barbados in the east, Belize in the west. I won't speak for Jamaica, but I would think it difficult for Jamaica to expand much further to be the powerhouse that it can be without a larger population. And even if you look at Barbados's performance, and I see Dr. Ram in the audience, even if you look at Barbados's performance, I'd like to suggest that Barbados has done relatively better since independence, largely because we had a greater density of population than most. But that density is still not sufficient. And in fact, if you look at the study done by the same Dr. Ram, the slides, you will see that, and it is sobering, that in the case of Barbados, between 2015 and 2100, we are projected to have a decline in our population of 10%. In the case of Guyana, a 24% decline, which I find difficult to believe. St. Lucia, 28%, Trinidad, 28%, Jamaica, 50%. Now, the bottom line is that we need migration, but we need managed migration. And if managed migration within the region comes with, first and foremost, within the context of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. The second aspect of the managed migration outside of the region comes from us being able, like Canada, who has done it very quietly, very deliberately, but Canada has been able to propel its growth largely because it has been able to bring into Canada the skills necessary to build out its economy, and to do so with Canadians accepting the ethos of what Canada is about, and to recognize that the framework for the Charter of Rights and all of the other things are kept intact. We have to start controlling how we speak, and we need to be able to speak to our people deliberately on these issues. The bottom line is that the labor market information system is a tool, but the real need is for us to accept that there has to be population flows within the region if we are going to build out our economies. And that's the harsh reality of our existence. And I end by this simple point. How can Suriname be larger than the Netherlands and have a population of 580,000 and the Netherlands a population of 17 million? How does Guyana have the same size of England, Scotland, and Wales and have a population of 780,000, 800,000 in Guyana, and England, Scotland, and Wales are at 65 million? How does Belize have a population of 380,000, but it is the size of Israel that has a population of 8 million? And how does Barbados believe that it is densely populated when at 430 square kilometers, we are marginally smaller than Singapore at 670 square kilometers, and Singapore has 5 million people, and we are yet to hit the 300,000 mark officially?
I think from the applause, the audience know what to do.
That is what you call the Patrick Manning route. But there are many ways to the destination.
I heard you, Prime Minister. Another question from the audience. I have 6 more lined up, and we have only gone 1 hour.
Good night. My name is Charchetta Grootvam, and I'm from Suriname, and I'm the Dean of the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors. To begin, the youth is the future, so I think it's necessary that youth have a voice in this consultation of CSME, and for that we applaud you. If we are looking at the free movement of persons, then it is my belief that we need to look at the movement of young persons across member states who want to study and grow business. We constantly hear about the high levels of brain drain and the stagnation of economies in the region. So if our bright and creative minds are so frustrated with the process of CSME, how am I, as Dean of the CYAs, supposed to mobilize youth to move across the region against the background where leaders still can find solution to regional travel? Leaders still can find solution to the harmonization of foreign policy. And we are yet to create a regional identity of what it is to be a CARICOM citizen. So Prime Minister Motley, given that you hold portfolio for CSME, how do you envision CSME to work for the youth, not only in Barbados, but across the region? Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. As I indicated, the first thing within the context of CSME is to give expression to what it is intended to give expression to. The freedom of movement of people is absolutely paramount. And the truth is that we've covered a lot of categories. There is a sticking point now on the definition of agricultural labor. That's settled now. It's just security guards. Now, I don't want to laugh. But if we don't know the difference between a security guard and an ordinary person, we have a problem. And it is a case simply of us settling and agreeing. And I think we are more at the mercy of whether we have a quorum in the Legal Affairs Committee than anything else. So that we do have the capacity for freedom of movement of people and capital. We have cooperation in security. I would have had the opportunity many years ago of leading the security efforts for Cricket World Cup. And most people don't realize that that led CARICOM to be able to move security as the fourth pillar of regional integration. Because as I like to say, you cannot have legal people and legal goods moving and not believe that illegal goods and illegal people will move too. And therefore, you are as strong as your ability to constrain the illegality. So that what works for us is that we've been able to hold our society safe on a number of fronts, because with the advanced passenger information systems, every person that comes into the region, we vet against Interpol in real time, and we vet also against other countries whose access to databases we have agreements for. But it is the other things that young people may want a little faster, and I hope will demand after tonight a little faster. One, the single domestic space in telecommunications. The days of charging for roaming in the Caribbean region need to come to an end. And the bottom line is, many of us have the same carriers working across. I am happy to say that I've met with both, and both in principle have said that they understand the need for a single domestic space. I'm happy to report, I think the Secretary General is meeting with the lead Prime Minister on ICT, Prime Minister Mitchell, on Friday morning. And I really do hope that by the time we have the next intersessional in Barbados, that we can have appreciable progress from the two major, because as far as I can see, it's CARICOM and the two major telecoms companies. So there are not a lot of players to come into the room for a discussion. So we should be able to align our diaries easily. But the bottom line is that who is in a position to demand it? The people of the region and the citizens of the region. And I'd like to suggest to the young people, in the same way that I have done to my young people within our political organization, matters pertaining to technology and the environment, we must be being pushed by the young people of the region. The young people of the region ought to be the ones pushing us, because these are the two areas that the Caribbean needs the greatest amount of liberation and the greatest amount of protection. Protection from the point of view of fighting the climate crisis, and liberation by using the digital framework and the digital tools and the technology that is available as a platform to engage and embrace the world, both in terms of the movement of our ideas and the purchase and sale of goods and services. So I hope that this is what the CSME can do for us as a people. We spoke as well about the need for the movement of information. And I'm saying to you, one of the best decisions taken in Port-of-Spain in the St. Anne's Declaration was that we were not going to constrain ourselves anymore by waiting for everybody to be on the same page. Because the truth is, even in a family, the 3 or 4 children don't move at the same level. So what does the mother and father have to do? They move with who they got and then bring along the rest. Carry the rest until they can move. That's the concept behind Chapter 7. So if we can find 2 or 3 or 4 countries that are prepared to share the news packages, the rest will come along. But what we can't continue to do now is pay obeisance to structure and institution at the expense of progress.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. Are we thinking of another program like this, Prime Minister?
I think we need to have them regularly. And I think that colleague heads in each country, because I don't believe that I should be the only one talking by far, but I do feel that the heads of government of the region ought to be engaging with the public, because what is this? This is open for questions, and we are in a position to answer. In some instances, I'll tell you, look, we're trying, but we ain't getting there. But in other instances, if we can have this level of engagement, it also allows people to plan, and hopefully somewhere in there, we are inspiring young people. And I put myself back to 30 years ago, when on this campus, not in this location, Michael Manley and Errol Barrow and others would have come at the law faculty, and we would have listened to them roll out. Both were in opposition then. Maybe that is not a good sign. Maybe we need to have more people in government, and I hope I'm breaking the mold. But the bottom line is this is the engagement that gives our young people the passion to want to be able to achieve and to move more. Now, how can people tell me that language is a problem? When, how many languages you speak in Suriname, my dear? 28? Nobody dialect. Enough. Okay? And I'm saying to you, even in terms of how we treat to Haiti, and we had this discussion, because there will have to be a few bridges that we build. And let's be straight. And then the bridges that we build are language bridges. They're bridges with respect to some cultural norms. There's applications now from the Dutch countries to be able to join in the same way that the British Overseas Territories are a member of CARICOM, the French ones, so that the OECS has now taken in what? Martinique and Guadeloupe. So that the bottom line is that, as I said, and the hurricanes have shown us that language cannot separate us. Now, ironically, I would be happy if the OAS took one goal and one goal alone. And that would be to allow the region, the hemisphere, to be trilingual if possible, or at least bilingual, rather than finding themselves involved in other affairs that may be in breach of their charter.
We have to go to break, but before we go, here's a question online, and we can respond on the other side. And of course, we also have the audience. Where does the diaspora fit into this conversation on regional unity, economic growth, and opportunity? Will there be space for them? So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll have the answer to that question and some more of your questions. What's in it for me? This town hall right here at the UWI K-Ville campus.
One aim of the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, CSME, is for CARICOM nationals to be able to move in the region, to seek work, to visit, to establish a business, or to provide services. CARICOM also provides a complaints procedure which allows you to report any instances where you have experienced difficulty in accessing your rights, either on arrival or once in the country. Simply complete the form provided online and at a number of locations. Submit it to the CSME focal point in your home country, the country where you had an issue, or via the web. The complaints procedure works to safeguard access to CSME for all CARICOM nationals. For more information, visit csmeonline.org or call your local CSME authority. The CARICOM Single Market and Economy. Make it work for you. With the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, CSME, opportunities to relocate for work as a CARICOM skilled national have been expanded to include 10 categories of persons. 2 of those categories are artisans and household domestics holding a Caribbean Vocational Qualification or CVQ. A CVQ is a certificate you can apply for based on how well you do your job. If you are certified as a household domestic, including housekeepers and home health workers, or an artisan, including persons in the building trade, craft persons and machine operators, you could be eligible to move for work. CVQ standards have been developed with regional employers, so your skills will be recognized wherever you go. Contact your national training agency to find out about CVQs for artisans or household domestics, or visit csmeonline.org for more information. The CARICOM Single Market and Economy. Make it work for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We have this town hall here on the UWI Cavehill campus, and we are streaming and broadcasting live from Barbados straight across to Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Kitts Nevis, Belize, and so many other CARICOM member states, and we are being inundated with so many wonderful questions. Just before we went to the break, Prime Minister and Secretary General, we had a question regarding how the diaspora can fit into the regional integration discussion.
SGU or me? The bottom line is that, as I said, we are underpopulated, and therefore we really need to be better utilizing the diaspora in order to be able to increase the production of goods and services. In Castries in July, the Secretariat will recall that we took a decision that Prime Minister Gonzalez is going to chair the ABCD, Africa, Brazil, Caribbean, and the diaspora engagement, because we recognize that we have to reach out to the diaspora. In our own way, that is what, in Barbados' case, why we have launched something called We Gather It in 2020, because we believe that we need to pause, bring our people home, parish by parish by parish for 12 months, and let us refine a more perfect vision for our country, recognizing that the only thing, I have a niece who lives in Australia and Sydney, the only thing I cannot do is to hug her. But I can see her every day, I can track her at her sporting events, I can monitor her development, I may even speak to her more often than I may speak to other people who are my family who live locally. So what does that tell you? That technology is that bridge towards being able to facilitate, one, communication. 2, we have just, and how we open up investment opportunities by advertising them, as well as creating for the flow of capital in, will also allow them to be active players in the building out of our economy. And 3, we need to be able to have them mentor and to be able to create the platforms for those of our citizens who need to go overseas. I have someone who has given me, there used to be something called the Barbados Annual Review. And every year, 1930s, 1940s, you would be amazed at the level of diasporic engagement that took place when there was no telecommunications and no airplanes. Now, how do we do that? And how did we have that happen before? But we are not now maximizing and propelling ourselves beyond where we were 40 or 50 years ago.
Some more questions from the audience, and we have right here, and oh, the lady at the back with the microphone.
Dr. Yvonne Weeks. I lecture here. I'm from Montserrat. I've been here 24 years, and about 12 years ago when I was coming back from home, an immigration officer stamped in my passport, employment prohibited. And I said, oh, no, I have a CSME stamp in my passport. Not only do I have a CSME stamp in my passport, but I work for the government at the Barbados Community College. And he said, go and regularize yourself. I guess the question I'm asking is that, first of all, I want to thank the Prime Minister for having this town hall meeting. I know what's in it for me as someone who came from Montserrat, but I am very concerned about the lack of trickle down to those individuals who have to implement the policies. So I had a very unpleasant experience with immigration, having been here for quite a long time. And so what I'm asking is, are there going to be, other than the town hall meetings, are there going to be programs that actually assist those individuals? Immigration is a perfect example, to ensure that the policy that you expect to be implemented is actually done at that level, because that was actually a very insulting experience for me at that time, and he was not prepared to listen or even to look at the fact that I had the stamp in my passport.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Regrettably, there's an example in almost every country of that. But I want to say that I think it's becoming less and less. And two, I want to say that the domestic engagement, Ambassador Comijong is here. There would have been a number of sessions over the course of the last 9 months or so with the labor movement, with the workers. And the truth is that what we do at the regional level has to be done at the domestic level, country by country by country by country. I'd like to suggest that we may have to have some funding, SG, and I know you don't want to hear that, but we may have to have some funding for strong public education. I mean, that CARICOM ad that we just heard is great, but we need more public education, because a town hall meeting is not sufficient. You know, politics is the art of repetition. And the bottom line is that if our people over and over are hearing these things, they are less likely to do the kinds of things that you referred to. Mercifully, that was 12 years ago. And I want to say that I think in Barbados we've learned our lesson a little bit. Because having had the unfortunate comment delivered on behalf of our government of ever so welcome wait for a call, we then saw a complete reduction in the disposable income being spent in shops, supermarkets, gas stations, rental accommodation, to the point where a large part of the reason for our economic decline, in my view, was as a result of us arbitrarily and abruptly closing the doors to CARICOM engagement in this country. It was not our finest moment. And I say so conscious that in almost every Caribbean country, including those who are not signatory to the CSME, the population of persons who were the police, the nurses, the pan boilers, the priests, were from Barbados. And teachers. Okay? And that we have been lucky as a nation that, and if you go back to the Hansard debates in 1850, you will see the then parliament, which was very much a colonial parliament with the exception of Samuel Jackman Prescott, reflecting negatively on the fact that the ex-slaves were going to Guyana to work in the factories in Guyana to constitute the skilled workforce of the Guyanese sugar industry. Now, we need to learn our history and to understand it and to appreciate it to ensure that we don't make the mistakes again. There was a time when Black Stallion song would play and it would be a badge of honor. How many young people under the age of 18 knows if I say on the same ship? I can't sing no more because I can't sing.
You'd like me to continue?
Just to inform that we have undertaken, this is a problem that, and I do agree with the Prime Minister, it's not as acute as it used to be before, but it continues because we continue to get complaints from CARICOM citizens whenever they move. We've done training throughout the region on several occasions. I think, as Prime Minister Motley has mentioned, there has to be some responsibility at a national level. I mean, we go around, we train, we have workshops, we meet with the chief immigration officers, but you hear these problems time and time again. We're just going to have to continue addressing it, and I hope the other member states will borrow leaf from the Book of Barbados and do their own internal training as well.
And we have one in the front for the longest while. There's a question here from online as well. As a CARICOM researcher, one of the biggest problems encountered is access to information. Can you please outline what plans there are to make data and information more accessible to the average CARICOM citizen and researcher?
You want us to answer now?
Sure. Quick one.
Absolutely critical. The last time we were in this room, I see Ambassador Matherin here. She was on this platform with me, with the head of the ITC, Arancha Gonzalez, and we made the point then that the biggest issue that the world will face relates to access to data and technology. And you have three different perspectives on it: China, the US, and Europe. With respect to China, they believe that the government should control a lot of it. With respect to the US, they believe the private sector should control much of it. With respect to Europe, the question of data privacy and the individual owning the data seems to be the dominant direction of Europe. We have in the Caribbean to determine what we believe. From my own perspective, I believe that citizens should own their data, but there must always be the ability of the state to be able to survive and to be able to do that which is necessary. I regret that the absence of technical capacity and drafting skills has meant that the kind of model pieces of legislation that ought to be driving discussion on policy are not yet available. And those are some of the things, when I talk to you about a regional law reform commission, that I believe will help us. Now, I feel that the Secretariat is doing monumental work with too few people. But the bottom line is that technology now allows us to be able to leverage more effectively access to all kinds of data that did not exist. If we can do it as governments, why are we not facilitating it for our citizens?
Saludos.
Yes, Secretary.
I recognize that there is need for a lot more information to be disseminated, not just statistics, but we do so many reports and studies that I'm very much aware, it was raised with me this morning, that's just not available. We draft how many bills for member states, and you don't even know that they're there. And we have to make our website more user-friendly as well. I also have challenges when I go on there and I try to find some stuff. So we're going to be working on that, and I hope before long you'll see an improvement, not only in access to the website, but the content, so that you'll be better informed going forward. The next big step is to begin to publish the decisions of the heads of government.
Thanks.
Good evening, Secretary General. Good evening, Madam Prime Minister. My name is Michelle Cave, and I really like how you are rolling out this space, thoughtfully implementing the CSME. For years, I wrote a column here, bringing the tenets of the treaty to the public spaces. So I'm appreciating this open forum. I have a question about the security, the ownership of our data. Apart from the people and companies who track and ultimately predict our every move while we are online, apart from the security or the non-security at the whim of algorithm designers, I realize our public data is rather precious and probably pretty expensive to house securely. As a little island, I think it would be tremendously expensive. But together as CARICOM, as we grow more interdependent, I think we can do so. I think if we have something of a Carib cloud or something kin to house the public data, or I don't know if it's housed somewhere else, but I think if we had something like that, we'd be in a more independent space.
Sure. I was just checking to see, I don't think we have a data protection bill. It is something that has been brought to our attention, I believe, even when we negotiate some of our external trade negotiations with third parties. That is a necessity. It's something that we're looking at. Okay, thank you. Forgive me, the very, very last part of your question I missed.
So I was wondering if we are looking towards owning the spaces that we keep our public data. Do we have it here in the region as we grow more interdependent? Is it something that you're looking at to house the public data here, or in another space?
There's been no settled policy on it, and the fact that we don't have a model data protection bill easily available has been an issue. We've had to do it in Barbados just recently, because the truth is that once you move into the electronic kiosk and you're dealing with European airlines, you're going to have to give them the assurance that you're protecting the individual data. But this comes back to my original point. We shouldn't be doing it because Europe requires it of us. We should be doing it because we have, as a community, settled and determined what is the mechanism that we want. As we said, in China, they have a different philosophical perspective from the US, who has a different philosophical perspective from the European Union. Ours is more likely to be closest to the European Union because our constitutional framework across the region is similar to the European Union Human Rights Convention, and therefore you're likely to find yourselves in that thing. Barbados is probably actually one of the few countries that doesn't have an explicit right to privacy in its 1966 constitution. But most other countries in the region have it because they either came after, or in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago Constitution guaranteed it when it was passed after the initial independence constitution. As it relates to public spaces, it comes back down once again to how we view the common space and the public realm. Now, I am of the view that CARICOM ought to be able to own aspects of the public realm alongside with governments having licenses or individual citizens, but that requires in-depth conversation, because the truth is that while we identify what is that space that we have individual territorial claim upon, we have not done so for what I call the patrimony and the public realm of the region. So there are aspects of the Caribbean Sea that lie outside of the extended continental shelf, which is the furthest limit that we can go under the Law of the Sea Convention. But that may still be part of the Caribbean Sea. Now, do we not protect those aspects of the Caribbean Sea because they don't fall within the sovereign right of an individual member state? Can't do that, because pollution, as we're learning with sargassum weed, flows with the currents. So what might be in the middle of that wide expanse of sea before you get into the Gulf of Mexico may ultimately harm those of us if we feel that we want to be very particular about how we're doing it. The greatest problem, and it was perhaps part of the problem with the Federation, is the elephant in the room, but it is the critical aspect. And I go back to the days of Sir Harold St. John that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Walcott, and the AG here may remember. Until there is an independent mechanism for the funding of CARICOM, we are going to have these problems. Heads of government decisions at SG have the force of law, so the public needs to see them. But the absence of that automaticity of financing in some respect means that the Secretariat is always at the mercy of individual governments. It is the elephant in the room. Now, my own view is that the cost of sustaining the Caribbean public space can't be borne only by the domestic population, because it is not only the domestic population using the public spaces. And that to the extent that we have visiting the region, more than, in some instances, in some countries, more than double the population. We have to find minimalist ways of sharing the burden. What do I mean by that? If you added $2 or $3 US to every passenger coming into the region, or every passenger, traveling in the region, and taxes, I'm not meaning large taxes, I'm talking $2 or $3. We have about 20 million people. 20 million, and then by the time you carry them back out, it's 40 million. So that basically, that is enough money to finance all of the Caribbean institutions, with some left over to go into the Regional Development Fund on an annual basis. $2 US. Now the bottom line therefore is, will the region accept that this is a burden that we can bear? Or will we continue to believe that we isolate it? And in some instances, there are airports that have assigned their revenue to other financiers because of debt. But the bottom line is that we can still place it on top of it. And how many tourists you think are going to complain for paying $2 for each trip? Your problem is going to be that most countries are going to find it difficult to make change.
We will not have a town hall on the CSME without questions on LEAT and the other elephant in the room, Haiti. So those questions are online and are coming, Secretary General and Prime Minister. But I recognize you have been standing there for quite a while, and I will acquiesce to you.
I appreciate being recognized, and I apologize for my anxiety to speak. I recognize this is an occasion for speaking, as George Lamming has said. My name is Margaret Gill, and I count myself a George Lamming scholar. I just received a PhD on leadership and transformation in the novels of George Lamming.
Congrats.
The question, thank you. One of the reasons I mentioned that is just coming to me, and it is because I'm in conversation with people all over the region who are very happy for me. People for whom I send vacancy notices that are sent to me that I can no longer use because I'm a retired tutor from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. The people of the Caribbean are probably far, far more integrated than the politicians of the Caribbean. So I don't say this to be attacking the minister, the Prime Minister.
Trust me, I don't take no attack. I count myself as one of the people of the Caribbean.
And I'm very happy to hear that, because you described yourself several times by the use of the pronoun we, and you meant the politician. I take very good notes because I was a good student, right? So I want to come back to the question raised by Mr. LaRocque. You identified first at the beginning of your speech, sir, that the problem of CARICOM is a problem of implementation. That problem will remain with us out of this room if we don't name actually the real elephant in the room. I would like to ask the minister, and I'd like to ask you, Mr. LaRocque, what is it in CSME for you? For you the politician, you the secretariat manager. And I will end by saying, what is in CSME for me? What is in CSME for me is that the young pilots who were at the Barbados Light Airplane Club that had an opportunity to go to Canada to be able to continue their flight training. I was the only parent there, and it was a room full of young men and one or so women, and they had an opportunity to go and fill a pilot shortage that the entire world is talking about, and they're not able to do it because the Barbados Light Airplane Club is not perceived as one of our tertiary institutions. So what is in CSME for me is to see the opportunity and potential of those young people be fulfilled. I am a parent, and I'm a poet, and I'm an economist, and I'm also a Christian. What is in CSME for me is to see that there is no illegality remaining among the ideas that we have about Caribbean people. Thank you.
Perhaps I can help you more from a perspective of national, because your concern seems to be the capacity of the Barbados Light Airplane Club to certify the students that it has trained. I see here the lady in charge of our accreditation council, and if I can ask, and I will ask the Minister of Education and Technical and Vocational Training to also make the approach, although typically it would be the other way around, with the Barbados Light Airplane Club making sure that their programs can be certified. But I hear you, because I do not feel that any citizen, especially if you are paying for your children to learn to fly, should pay and then at the end of it that what they've learned is not capable of being certified and translated into another program. So I hear you completely on that. As to the we, the truth is I've not yet figured out a way to separate. I tell people that I do politics, but I am a Caribbean person. And the bottom line is that the day that we try to separate the politics from our identity is the day that we're in trouble. So you will forgive me if, therefore, I locate myself first and foremost among the aspirations of Caribbean people, but then I use the opportunity that the population of Barbados has given my colleagues and I for the next few years to do as well as we can to integrate, because in the top of our head, I didn't need to see Dr. Ram's slides to know that on all of the indices, the Caribbean, regrettably, is lagging. And that we have not only to stop lagging on international indices across economic and social and environmental factors, but that we must also come to grips with the fact that within 48 hours, all of us could be in the same position as the people of Barbuda or the people of Abaco or the people of Dominica after the sustained storms. And therefore, the Caribbean finds itself as a very unique moment as to what and how is to be done to secure our future. I used to say that we should have been born at the time of independence to be able to give, we should have been in public life at the time of independence to help forge a nation. But the truth is that we have been brought to this moment in time to save the future of our nations. And the reference just now to Montserrat only served to remind me that what happened in Montserrat with the people of Montserrat becoming the first climate refugees of the post-independence movement of the region, ironically, reminds us that we have always to be fighting with the environment within which we find ourselves. And I don't know how we can do that, have Guyana and Suriname and Belize, and not be making the kinds of planning or having the kinds of discussions that allow us to be able to be there for one another when we most need to be there for each other, particularly with earthquakes, the level of seismic activity, which we don't talk about a lot, and the level of hurricane and storm activity that we are seeing in the region. So I think we have to have a much broader conversation, and I thank you for locating it in there. I'll say one last thing. The Ministry of Culture in Barbados has agreed with my office that we should sponsor on an annual basis a discussion among our artists. Visual artists, creative artists, all kinds. Why? Because our artists dwell in the realm of the possible. It is only when we settle the possible that governments can determine the probable. And therefore, Barbados has accepted that part and parcel of our securing our future has to be a discussion about the possible. And who best for us to engage with about that discussion of the possible than those people among our civilization who spend day in and day out thinking of the possible, such that those of us who are restricted only to executing the probable can draw from their inspiration to move forward.
SG, you asked what's in it for you?
What is in it for me? I think the best way for me to answer that question is what I do is not a job. What I do is answering a calling, because I have a belief, a strong inner belief in integrating our people and generally trying to achieve a community for all. It's a calling. I don't know how else to explain it to you. What is it for me is to see success so that you, the people, can benefit as it is intended to benefit. That's what's in it for me. And I dare say that for my colleagues who are here in the front row, who work 25 hours a day, I speak on their behalf as well.
Thank you very much. My name is Nelsia Robinson. I am representing the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples. And I'd like to make a quick comment. I am thankful that you, Honorable Prime Minister, hosted this forum. This morning we had a very useful discussion, and I was able to voice certain points concerning the indigenous peoples of the region. But 2 points of discussion that had to do with funding tonight brought to me the fact that indigenous peoples, when they seek funding from funding agencies, they do not have the Caribbean indigenous people as a priority because they say the numbers are too small. But these very vulnerable small numbers are in need of assistance. And I was glad that the Honorable Prime Minister referred to the Charter of Civil Society, in which the needs of the indigenous people are also listed. So in terms of research, I do not know if any research was done at the level of CARICOM or other agencies on the status of indigenous peoples in the region. But I do know that some NGOs have attempted it. UNIFEM, that is now UN Women, and the UWI would have focused on the women. So if there was not such a research study, that is something that needs to be done, because it could influence getting some of that funding that is needed from the funding agencies. And I want to just touch a bit on the domestic workers or the household workers, because initially they were not included for the movement of people, but they are now within the listing. But there is a need for legislation at the national level to ensure that the conditions of work, etc., are put in. And I understand that they are still among the lesser paid and very vulnerable people. But they do a very important job. They enable the high professionals and others to execute their jobs by taking care of the different needs within the household. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment.
I want to support you entirely on that point. As I said, the Charter of Civil Society is not a justiciable document, but it is a document that is intended to cause us to aspire to a better place and to protect those within our communities. Part of the difficulty is that, and now that we have the Caribbean Congress of Labour to the table along with the private sector, I suspect that we may have placed before us a number of the issues as to the disparity in treatment or labour laws that exist in the region. And quite frankly, only this afternoon before we came here, we discussed the absolute necessity for a social floor. And what do I mean by a social floor? Part of the anxiety of people to the movement of others comes because they believe that they're going to have to compensate or to add to things that have been a deficit in persons' development before they came. If we can agree to a basic floor of social development to which Caribbean countries commit, then I believe that the capacity to facilitate movement throughout the region will be that much easier. Now, it's not an easy point, but it is possible. If each of us had to go and find an examinations and quality assurance council for secondary education, we wouldn't have the money to do it. But we have the Caribbean Examinations Council doing it for us. The question is, can we get them to also look at other aspects of educational development that we are carrying at the national level that could be better integrated so that we could have movement on it? Can we do the same thing in labor in terms of the suite of labor legislation that we're looking at in the region? And for those countries, because you still have to give it to a government whether it wants to sign on certain things or not, if they want to go there. In terms of health care, CARFA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency that Mr. Walcott, would have helped establish when we were in opposition. Same thing again. What it does is to ease the pressure on the domestic governments to have to do these things. And I'm not sure if the SG recalls, I'm sure Desiree does and a few others, that in 2007 when the heads of government meeting was held in Barbados at the Hilton, we agreed then at Needham's Point on the absolute need for greater functional cooperation to bridge the gap on a lot of these issues. Now, the vexatious issue in the region will always be minimum wages. And some countries will have minimum wages and some won't. And some will have it partially, as we do in Barbados for shop assistants and others, although we are looking to expand it beyond that. So these are some of the issues that are critical. But can I say something to you? If the heads of government only meeting twice a year, we ain't going to get there, well, most of us wrong here. It will be for the students. So that unless we quicken the pace of discussion and implementation, we are going to marginalize the region without even realizing it. And Dr. Ram's prediction, or fear, I prefer to call it fear rather than prediction, might become a reality.
Secretary General and your staff, can a UWI master's graduate who is a citizen of Haiti access a CARICOM skills certificate? Prime Minister Motley, why is it so hard to do business, to open your business in your country?
Because they should have voted for us 5 years ago. In all seriousness, let me answer the second and go back to USG with the Haitian one. Look, we've inherited a situation, and Dr. Ram's graphs show it all, where Barbados effectively lost a decade. In fact, I think we're the lowest in your list in terms of the performance of the last decade, and we are now trying to catch up and to make ground. But the bottom line is that it takes time. And the members of cabinet, as well as members of the private sector, will tell you that we have now a subcommittee that is literally addressing every aspect of the conduct of business in Barbados, so that over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, you should see appreciable progress. And certainly within 2 to 3 years, I hope that you will be asking, why is Barbados doing so strong?
Yep, the short answer to the question is yes. A Haitian national who was a graduate from a recognized university can in fact obtain a skills certificate. The only problem is that it's not available in Haiti. Haiti has not yet, although Haiti is party to the treaty and as such is a member of all of the obligations, Haiti has not yet put in place its own requirements for fulfilling those obligations for obvious reasons. They're really obvious reasons. We've been working with Haiti over the years. They have some very severe capacity constraints. Just this afternoon we were talking about seeking to see how we could do some sort of special dispensation for Haiti yet again. some sort of special development dispensation for Haiti within the context of the CARICOM integration arrangements, within the context of the CSME. But the short answer is yes, a Haitian national who is a graduate of a recognized university does meet the requirements for obtaining a skill certificate.
It's now 8 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, and we have had the consent previously of the broadcast institutions that they will not stop this program. They will continue once there are questions to be asked. We go to the top.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And to the head table, greetings and salutations. My name is Wayne Ongfra Wells. I'm here speaking on behalf of the Pan-African Coalition of Organizations, Barbados, PACO. I would like to start by honoring our Prime Minister. I am not seeking any favors, but those of us who understand a spiritual journey, we know that there is a time when people ascend to the positions they were destined for. Prime Minister Motley, I have the permission with my wife to say this. I love you real bad. I love you real bad. Because we are witnessing the evolution of what a true politician is supposed to be. As you have alluded to, we have in the Caribbean produced greats. But somewhere along the line, the legacy has not been continued. And we allow ourselves to go back from whence we should never have allowed ourselves to go so far back, to be controlled by other peoples. My question is how we as sovereign states of the Caribbean can allow ourselves to be held hostage by former colonial financial institutions, in that we as the sovereign countries cannot trade with our neighbors because of embargoes and sanctions. If a bank comes into our region, the bank must be disciplined by our own trajectory of development, our own morals. If we go into their territory, well, then we will be disciplined. As we journey towards the CSME, it is then fitting that there must be a financial institution that represents the sovereignty of the Caribbean region. And no one, no embargo, no sanction should determine who we trade in with, especially if they are within our region. If we stand in Trinidad, we can see Venezuela just there. We can see our sister Cuba just there. And yet it is difficult to move finances or to do business with those sovereign countries, with these sovereign nations of the Caribbean. We have to address this situation. And why I love you, Madam Prime Minister, is because while I sat here, I heard over and over again, we're from the same place, taking the same trip, on the same ship.
And I know you could sing. The issue is not simple, Fra. And you've merged a number of things together that perhaps need dissection in order to achieve progress. There is no doubt that Barbados, as well as most CARICOM states, stand against the use of embargo and sanctions against the people of Venezuela and the people of Cuba. I said as much in my United Nations speech, but so did most of the CARICOM heads who spoke. part of the difficulty comes as a result of most of our trade in goods and services being located in the North Atlantic countries, and therefore the ability to impose sanctions that hurt is there. So you can't change overnight without changing your trade and investment relationships over time. And there lies the mismatch. But we have another problem. And the other problem comes as a result of us being invisible and without voice. Because of that, those in the Justice Department in the States could have made a determination that that has led to the kind of de-risking that we've seen major banks undertake, because as far as they're concerned, we are just too small for them to even bother to take the risk to determine whether we are complying or not with the different rules that have been settled at an international level. And as a result, therefore, we have been at the short end of the stick. Those banks that have international relationships or that are internationally owned are better off than those that are indigenously owned. Short of it, we cannot afford to be a pariah or a leper's colony, for want of a better phrase, cut off from the rest of the world. And this is the point that we have been making as a regional grouping, but without sufficient progress. The irony is that the progress came first and foremost with the cruise ship companies, and Prime Minister Chassenay will tell you that when he raised the issue with the owners of the cruise ships, they then got on the phone and made calls immediately to the CEO of American Express and to others, who then got on the phone and made calls to the presidency, as it was then, and then who made calls to the Justice Department. And therefore the situation could have been far worse, affecting even our cruise ship business, with people coming off the cruise ships and using their credit cards because the amounts would not be cleared if we were completely de-risked, if there was a complete de-risking. We have been trying to engage where it matters, because in Congress, the American government is made up of the legislature and the executive and the judiciary, like all other governments. But we have traditionally dealt only with the executive. In recent years, we are dealing more and more with the legislature, because they have a role to play in us being able to deal with some of these situations. There may well also be a case for us engaging with our colleagues in Europe, because as we did on Venezuela, where we said, and the International Contact Group was established, which is not as, has a slight variation on where we in CARICOM stand now, because I believe the last position is that they too are looking for dialogue, even though they came out originally and said, some of the members of the European community, that they were recognizing Guaido. We have been adamant from day one that there has to be dialogue, and that dialogue is critical, and that not to have dialogue puts us in breach of the Inter-American Convention establishing the OAS, as well as the conventions establishing the United Nations. We, I would like to think, have been shown to be correct 10 months later, because when Prime Minister Rowley, Prime Minister Harris, and myself with USG visited the UN Secretary General, it was January. And we were being told then that the time for dialogue was over. We have now seen since then that the time for dialogue is far from over, and that we need to be able to press on. Now the question is, today for whom, tomorrow for whom? And unless small countries stand and commit to principle, then a form of bullying will always obtain, or we are at risk of suffering from it, because the mighty will prevail. And we in the Caribbean have long understood, as did, by the way, go back and read the history of the United States of America, and go back and read what those 13 individual states had to do before and in the Federalist Papers in order to constitute the democracy that they now have, so that for us to adhere to anything that undermines the rule of law and the principles enshrined by the rule of law is to put ourselves at risk. And that is a simple position. Now, does that mean that we condone all things that happen within nation states? No, we don't. There are things that happen in the United States of America or the United Kingdom or China or our own Caribbean states that may not always pass the test. But the way to deal with it is not to determine that I have the right to implode you or to go into you or to upset the apple cart. Let us start with the conversations. And the unilateral action of mighty states has too often in the history of mankind led us to what? To war.
Thanks very much, Madam Prime Minister. I take 6 of 10 questions on the same theme just before you. I'll take 6 persons one time. Madam Prime Minister, freedom to move within CARICOM, does this include the movement of sex workers? Good.
Attorney General, where are you going?
Good. May I continue? Please comment on why airline travel is also so expensive. That's not connected. Taxes. From Raisa Joseph, how do we promote CSME with increasing taxes placed on travel by CARICOM governments, impeding regional movement and development? From Ignatius Jaw, how do we propose to resolve the regional transportation challenges to enable the region to truly recognize freedom of movement? And Judith Gitton says, it appears that on the matter of the regional airline LIAT, we appear to be utilizing short-term solutions for a long-standing, longer-term problem. How does the panel propose the long-term solution to ensure the viability and sustainability of this critical entity? So sex workers and LIAT.
You really want the two of them in the same breath?
On the same trip.
Leave island anytime. Look, the simple answer is that you can work to do legal things. And to the extent that the sex workers' work is legal in the individual countries, yes, they can be registered. The bottom line is that we have, how do we reach 50 and 60 years old and 40 years old as countries and can't have difficult discussions? As individual human beings at 40 and 50 and 60, we are already having very difficult discussions with ourselves, our families, our children. And the bottom line is that the issue, therefore, isn't whether they can work. The issue is what is the legal status of the work that they do. Now, there are some people who said to me that if the oldest profession known to mankind was perpetrated and done more by men, it would be legal today. Now, I don't know if it is true or not. But suffice it to say that as long as it is illegal, you have a problem. So your first issue is to determine the legality of their work. If it is then legal, of course then, heads of government will have to determine whether there's certification for it or not. On a more serious note, we have a real problem with HIV and AIDS and with other sexual communicable diseases that if we don't treat to it in a serious way, will affect the just and the unjust, the holy and the unholy. And we have to come to grips with this in our reality as mature countries. It does not help us to ostracize anyone in our society because at the end of the day, the ostracism will eventually find its way back with mainstream consequences. Suffice it to say that for now. And I hope that the conversations will be had. The Caribbean has already shown itself to be one of the more successful regions in bringing the incidence of HIV and AIDS down. Why? Because irrespective of the fact that it remained illegal on the books, more often than not, government-sponsored engagement through the ministries of health and through our public health agencies with the most affected populations. That is the kind of compassion that a country needs in order to sustain its development. With respect to Leah, you can clap for that according to Matt Finger. With respect to taxes and Leah, look, countries often have to take protective action every now and again. And that's what Article 43 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas allows us to do with protection to safeguard balance of payments. Correct? But there are times also when fiscally you need to close a gap. And perhaps more often than we should have, we have used travel taxes, including Barbados, to help close the gap in our fiscal circumstances until growth can catch up and until we, as we certainly hope to do in our own instance, to be able to reduce the level of taxation on individual tickets. But having said that, part of our difficulty comes back to the base being too narrow. Now, if we can expand the base, as I just said, to be able to cover every single traveler so that we don't have to look for separate money to send to CARICOM agencies, then we can begin to look at bringing down some of the taxes in other areas. We, however, need to move to the point where we treat the LIAT planes and the inter-Caribbean planes, because they're not promoting LIAT alone, and CAL planes that fly interregionally as almost like buses, from the perspective that we recognize that we need to be able to strip out the costs and to be able to have more regular travel, even if in smaller planes. Now, there's some discussions that have to take place in LIAT. LIAT is not a CARICOM issue. LIAT is the issue of 3 or 4 governments having to have shareholder discussions. And I have promised you and the Caribbean public that I'm not going to have these discussions across the sea, because there is nothing to be gained by an articulation of a position only for the sake to say I said so or I did so, without being able to have resolution to the matters. LIAT 1974 Limited is a complex issue. And it is complex because it has been losing money for how long? I turn to the president of the CDB because they carry a lot of the debt for LIAT. But the bottom line is that it does not need to be complex, because what we have done is to place the burden of LIAT only on the shareholders, without recognizing that routes cannot be sustainable unless they're either financially profitable or economically desirable. If they are financially profitable, there is no issue, because the profit is after you have taken into account all of your payments, including the payments that governments are now paying now for the planes. If it is economically desirable, then we need to be able to have a minimum revenue guarantee, such that once the load factor of particular routes falls below whatever the agreed average is, be it 65% or 63% or 60%, governments who want to sustain those routes say, I will pay the difference between the two, as we are currently doing with American Airlines, as we are currently doing with Virgin Airways in many Caribbean countries, so that the concept of a minimum revenue guarantee is not alien to us as Caribbean people. Now, if you expect the 3 or 4 shareholder governments alone to carry the burden, you will end up in trouble each time, because it means that at some point they're going to make commercial decisions because there is not a bottomless pit to service it. Now, there are also other issues as to whether it makes sense for LIAT to lease 7 planes and own 3. Now, if you're leasing, you're leasing. And if you're leasing, does that not free up capital to allow you now to invest back into the airline so that you can have the kind of software system that allows you to code share with American or JetBlue or any of the other entities that we are currently not now capable of code sharing with? So there's some serious, sensible discussions. Before we came to government, the heads of government met and agreed to the urgent restructuring of LIAT, did phase 1, and never did phase 2. If you don't do phase 2, if you go for an operation and you only take out part of the wound that is causing the problem, but you still have diabetes and the wound is still there, you are at risk of what? Sepsis. Now, I believe that we can solve the problem, but it is going to require us coming together and agreeing, and in fairness, we tried to, but all of the stakeholders were not necessarily on the same page earlier this year. I trust and pray that we can find a common ground for all of the stakeholders, because while LIAT 1974 Limited may not be a viable proposition, reasonable, affordable, reliable air travel is the prerequisite for the growth of this region. I will only say on the maritime that we need to have a sea bridge as well. And we are hoping that we can put that together. But the one thing we know is that cargo on its own is unlikely to be profitable. People on their own is unlikely to be profitable. So we need to find a mechanism that allows us to blend both the movement of people, cargo, and vehicles in order to be able to allow for greater trade in goods and greater movement of categories of people that do not now travel, as we see with the Trinidad and Tobago Sea Bridge. How does a population of 60,000 people in Tobago sustain the movement of over 1.5 million people between Trinidad and Tobago annually? Because people, school children can travel affordably. Congregations can travel affordably. People can go and buy hardware in Port of Spain if they don't feel like buying it in Scarborough. People can move up and down sporting teams who hitherto would not have been moving. So as long as we can create the maritime bridge as well, there is the possibility of unlocking new categories of travelers that do not now exist, in addition to reducing the cost of cargo in circumstances where very often the cargo now has to go north before it comes back south.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister Motley, I must say you have made several positive reference to CXC. I'm Wayne Wesley, the new registrar and CEO of CXC since August, right?
Congratulations.
I know you have a passion for education as well, and that you actually worked in the education ministry here. So I must first say, though, on behalf of the staff of CXC, accept the positive reference that you have made towards us in terms of an entity that worked. Your last point, however, is something that we are working on when you made reference to CXC assisting governments in changing, is that a part of our transformation effort now is not to project CXC only as an assessment body, but as a body critical to regional development and integration. And when we talk about regional development, we are talking about human capital development to facilitate the competitiveness of the region. One of the things we are working on now and looking forward for ministries across the region to work with us on is to ensure that the bulk of persons leaving our secondary school are leaving and being able to function at the competencies required in society. Every single person must be operating the requisite level of competence at the grade 9 level at least to function in society. Because what we are having now, and we haven't touched on it much this afternoon or this evening, but the issue of crime is still a factor that we have to take into consideration. And I think education is one of the ways we can use to alleviate that problem we are having. And CXC at this moment is in its transformational mode. We are not just assessment, we are going to facilitate regional development. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have to seriously give consideration to wrapping up.
Yes, I think so.
Mrs. Jemmett? We have questions from why should we be harassed for a little marijuana, to why should we have a single CARICOM, why don't we have a single CARICOM currency, and several other questions that are all legitimate. We'll see if we can wrap up. So we'll take the one at the top and then we'll have you.
Okay, yeah. My name is Peter Lovell, and I'm very worried that all the talk I hear is like spinning the top in mud, because I ain't hear the word productivity yet. You know, we got CARICOM movement. People come here to get medicals and so on. But what they do, squat and probably get some money for squatting. But
I am going to interrupt you, PJ, because I'm not going to allow you to represent or misrepresent a situation in circumstances where I think that it is an unfair, discriminatory comment that people cannot answer on their behalf. So if you want to continue down that line, then I'm going to have to open the back face fully too.
Okay. Maybe I shouldn't talk about squatting, but I want to talk about productivity. Okay? We had education in this CARICOM for years. In 1960s, we opened the Cave Hill and we studied science. If we want to understand what point I'm making, we now are in trouble with water. And if I remember rightly, the last administration wanted to bring desalination plants. And the terms, according to you, my dear, were on the wrong side of science.
You can call me my love, because that's what Mia Amor stands for.
Well, I am lover, right? So it's love all around. But the point I am going to make is, why is it that we cannot do anything after so much years of science and so on, like build a desalination plant using our own skills and the people in the region? Why is it that in the 1980s, I knew a guy who was doing some research on wind energy, and he told me that it was proved that wind could run the whole of Barbados as far as electricity is concerned in the 1980s. And here we are talking about alternative energy, and we did not go down that road. We are going down a road where we are probably trying to get the energy sector in the hands of the colonial owners so that they can extract from us, just like, and I know you're going to object too, just like the tourist industry does. Okay? I'm not very pleased when I see that we can get an investor to come down here and buy land or plantations, and 7 hotels are going to be built, which are all inclusive. Because I always say that all inclusive tourism is not really any profit to us. Why is it that after all this time with education, which of course we had a little quarrel about.
Is it possible, sir, you can ask a question?
Yeah, I want we to concentrate on productivity in the development of CARICOM.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. There's a gentleman who has been there. Oh yes, you, and then I'll get you last. You have been there for half an hour. Yes.
Good evening. I am Chad Monaville, CARICOM Youth Ambassador for Barbados. I echo the sentiments of my dean, and indeed it's a pleasure to see that our heads of governments and the Secretariat has embraced the position our youth leaders have mandated that there should be nothing for the youth without the youth. I accept the position of the CARICOM Youth Development Action Plan that states that 63% of the region's population is under the age of 30, This implication, therefore, is that young people are the main beneficiaries of CSME. Prime Minister Motley, I suspect that you are aware, but I wish to note for the record that several commitments emanating from the Eye of the Future report of 2010 theme Investing in Youth for Tomorrow's Community. 9 years later, we are still struggling to draw on the intent of the report, which is to resource youth ambassadors and invest in programs that bring CARICOM citizens into a space of common identity and consciousness. Notwithstanding these shortcomings, we persevere as you have taught us to, and look forward to investments by the Secretariat and Member States for the technical and financial resources required to build capacity in the region. Consequently, I ask, as incoming Chairman of CARICOM, will you commit to meeting with the CYA Corps to discuss resourcing and investing in a potential regional commission of youth, which we propose will be the vehicle to strengthen and deepen regional identity, Caribbean consciousness, and greater participation in the decision-making of CSME? Thank you.
Of course I will, but I want you to do some thinking between now and January. How are you going to amplify your voice among young people to mainstream it? Because one of the major problems that we've had is that, regrettably, the engagement of young people by CARICOM has not been a mainstream activity. And I mean this with all sincerity. And PJ, you just spoke. You are a former secondary school teacher, or you may still be teaching, sorry. How do you get... You stop. Okay. How do you get... How do we get people... How do we get... And we're starting to engage our secondary school population shortly, I believe. They have me going into schools from the 20th of November going forward and then into next year. But how do we get our majority youth population to embrace these issues? I want to suggest, and that's why I keep going back to the 2 or 3 critical things that, in my view, will democratize CARICOM for Caribbean people. 1, information flows. Just news. Right now, the music from Jesse Royal and Buju Banton to Peter Ram and Lil Rick to Machel and Bunji, all across the region, Skinny, all of us across the region have the music democratized. We have access to it. But how do we do that for news and information? How do we do it for travel? And I go back to the issue, and it's not Liat alone. It's across the entire range of travel. You can't get from Barbados to Jamaica easily now, or Trinidad or St. Vincent to Jamaica. And how do we do it for telecoms and remove the roaming charges such that a call within the Caribbean community is a flat rate call? Those are the 3 indices that I feel we need to judge ourselves by for the democratization of regional integration beyond what happens by virtue of music, marriage, and occasionally trade. And if we can do that, then I think that your job with the CARICOM Youth Commission becomes that much easier and that much more strategic, because as the CARICOM Youth Commission, you ought to be the one leading the discussion for us on what the jobs of the next 30 years in the region will look like. Are we training to them? And are the universities within the region, not just UWI, but all of the universities within the region, in sync with where the heads of our young people are, and ultimately, Gervais, where the labor market and the investment is going to take us in the region? So I want to ask you to change your parameters a little bit and to come also to let us discuss how we are going to democratize that Caribbean identity. Peter Tosh, Bob Marley, Stalin, and the latter-day artists today have done it more for us. How do we make it real now in other aspects of our life? In the church does far more travel across the region than we give it credit for. I have opened up a Church of God convention here earlier this year with people from all through the Eastern Caribbean. I've opened up a Moravian convention with people from the Southern and Eastern Caribbean. What are the other areas of activity? Why can't children in Guyana and Suriname come to Barbados and Trinidad, and Barbadian and Trinidadian students go to Guyana and Suriname for a month, 6 weeks in the summer? And I don't mean 20 or 30, I'm talking about 1,000. But what is part and parcel of it? I keep telling people, I have a niece in Sydney. At 13 years old, they send her to go in the woods. There's no bathroom in the woods. There's no shower in the woods. She goes to one of the top schools there, but she is forced to have to assimilate and to function in any kind of environment. Now, if we say in the region that we want to send 1,000 kids or 500 kids, they're going to soon say, people are going to ask me what hotel they're staying at. There ain't no hotel. There ain't no hotel. But how do we learn about each other? Those kids, if they go and spend 4 weeks or 6 weeks in Suriname or Guyana, and Surinamese and Guyanese and Belizeans come here, and in Trinidad and St. Vincent and St. Lucia and Dominica, you think they're going to ever forget it? Never. Because that will count to be some of the best times in their life, because they're learning to bond, they're learning about other cultures. These are the kinds of things, and sometimes I feel we've become so proper and so boxed in that we've forgotten what it is that has made the Caribbean great. And we've forgotten what it is that has inspired Grantley Adams and Norman Manley and all of the others that went from 1948 to believe that there has to be a regional integration movement that puts us to be able to control our destiny rather than have others control it for us.
Because I promised you a last question, you sir.
Yes. Thank you.
My
name is Basil Maughan, and formerly of the UWI, and that's Maughan, please. First of all, I want to apologize. Now I have this forum. I want to apologize to all Guyanese for the arbitrary treating me out to some of them during the David Johnson era. I just want to say that is not who we are. I also want to say that I'm very pleased that the trajectory of the Barbados government in its outreach to Guyana and Suriname and to Africa, I'm really happy with that. I found myself, however, becoming impatient at the pace of movement of the government, and then having to give myself a reality check to say, well, I'm becoming spoiled because this is the fastest movement we've ever had in our history. But I'm going to ask a question which I think the Prime Minister might feel I'm getting a bit ahead of myself and I'm walking on eggs. But I wonder, isn't this time now we're talking about the CSME and speeding up that process? As she just mentioned, Norman Manley and Grantley Adams, isn't it about time that we put the idea of political integration, however marginal, back on the table? Because we started the forerunner of CARICOM with CARIFTA with 3 states. And if we start small, the US started small. If we start small and then get big, it can work. I'm thinking we do that, we have one space right off. And now we're talking to Guyana and Suriname, and if we bring them on board, then you're operating at an even greater level, a much higher level. I'm just putting that out to the Prime Minister. She may think I'm getting ahead of the game a bit, but isn't it time? Thank you.
I come from a country that has survived by integrating its people into the region and the rest of the world. That's been the story of Barbados. At the same time as we take persons coming in. I lead a political party that has in its constitution the pursuit of political integration as an objective of the constitution of the Barbados Labour Party. And it is the party that gave the region the Prime Minister of the West Indies Federation. So that I can say without fear of contradiction that the mission of my party has always been and will always be political integration, because that's the tenet upon which we stand. But I'm also politically sanguine. I'm also a political realist, and recognize that just as Frederick Douglass said that power concedes nothing, he wasn't talking about political movements in the Caribbean, but it is a universal truth. And to that extent, I believe that the issue of political integration will come upon us if, regrettably, Dr. Ram's fear becomes more of a likelihood. People will take decisions to save what they have if they believe it is in danger, regrettably. I would like to believe that these young people that we have here can help us in a movement that is inspirational, such that we are not acting against fear, but acting in pursuit of a greater cause that can give us greater strength and greater ability. But I'm not sure that we are at that moment yet. And the absence of political conversations at the level of political parties is the strongest evidence that it is not currently a reality. Because to the best of my knowledge, there is no political party in the region that is discussing the possibility of political integration. And that is the prerequisite to the movement of political integration. Until such time, I believe we have to do our best to forge ahead with this Caribbean movement that has a community of sovereign nations seeking to work together to allow the greatest possible opportunities to our citizens through freedom of movement of people, through the ability to move money, through the ability to establish businesses, through the ability to help one another, such that we don't have to do on our own that which can be done communally at a cheaper price than what it will cost us individually to do. And to that extent, I would like to believe that the success of that level of integration, particularly in the face of the climate crisis, and particularly in the face of chronic underperformance, will lead those of us to have that kind of discussion regionally that will have more of our people saying we are stronger together than we are individually. That has been and was the trajectory, because initially the 13 states of the United States could have remained separate. If they had, would the United States of America achieve the greatness that it achieved in the course of the last century? No. Now, that is not to suggest that it is not possible, but it is to suggest that the young people of the region in particular are the ones who must claim the space in the same way that will happen in England. In the same way that will happen in England, the young people of the region must claim the space. And those of us who know better and who know that it can make a difference, we must support them in the argument. So, yes, a little ahead of your time, but not on eggshells.
Thanks. Just before we have the representative from the university giving some closing comments, I had earlier asked about Haiti. Secretary General, there was a question I had taken online in terms of what CARICOM is doing to help with the challenges with Haiti, and especially integrating them into the CSME.
The question referred to the current challenges in Haiti?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are two parts to that question. As far as assisting Haiti or working with Haiti to integrate into the CSME, we've worked with Haiti long and hard over a number of years, particularly to try to get them up to speed on putting in place some of the legal requirements for being able to take part in the trading goods, movement and services. Regrettably, every time we make some progress, Haiti has had some challenge that sets them back. They have a real severe capacity issue that we have to be able to try and find a solution to. And earlier today, in discussions with the Prime Minister, who will be our incoming chair, we have begun to have a discussion on how we could conceive of some sort of development program for Haiti within our own context. As far as the current challenges in Haiti right now, the political challenges, CARICOM remains very, very concerned about what's happening in Haiti. We have called for a dialogue and peaceful resolution to the internal issues among all the parties concerned. The heads have agreed that a small committee of 3 heads of government go into Haiti to try to assist in bringing the parties together to find a resolution to the current problems. We have communicated to Haiti, and we are awaiting a response. The issue that is of the demonstrations, everybody has a right to demonstrate, but we urge that it be peaceful. We urge on all fronts that there should be a cessation of any kind of violence or intimidation. We regret very much the deaths that have taken place. I don't think there's a place for that. And it's happening from all quarters. And that's the current situation in terms of how we're dealing with Haiti.
I'd like to just add, because the SG was absolutely correct in referring to an earlier discussion. Haiti has been the victim of too much iniquity and unfortunate actions since the revolution. That is not to say that they cannot and must not take responsibility for some of what has happened in Haiti too. But I'm satisfied that the kind of development bridge that Haiti needs is so critical that once stability can come back to Haiti, and it is absolutely critical that it does, and hence the need for dialogue, as the SG said, but that once it comes back, CARICOM and the other countries of the world who understand the unfortunate blows of underdevelopment that Haiti had foisted on it would come together to allow us to begin to correct what is really one of the worst examples of how a country can be treated in this hemisphere over the course of the last few centuries. CSME is not going to be able to deliver to Haiti what is necessary to stabilize Haiti and to give it a good and secure future. It has to go way beyond that. And when you add to that the continuous damage caused by the earthquakes and the hurricanes, we begin to see a problem that requires nothing short of a massive redevelopment plan, but also anchored by structures of structural changes in governance that hitherto have not necessarily been seen. I remember that it was in the 1990s that Haiti first put in a treasury. We take these things for granted. And I remember Prime Minister Arthur coming to Cabinet and us agreeing to send officials from the Ministry of Finance to work with the Haitian officials to establish structures that we took for granted. And all I ask is for the Caribbean people, one, to be patient, two, for us, as you said, SG, to make it absolutely clear that we cannot continue to have the level of instability and believe that we are acting within the confines of the Charter of Civil Society. And to that extent, hopefully, we can have the stability first, but to recognize that what is required of us beyond that is far more than what the CSME can in and of itself deliver to the people of Haiti. And we have, in my view, a moral obligation so to do.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I would like to call on Professor Justin Robinson. He is the Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences. He's representing the principal in giving some closing remarks.
Excellency Irwin LaRocque, of CARICOM, Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mayor Motley, members of our cabinet, other members of government, members of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The hour is late. I'll be brief. As UWI, we exist to serve the Caribbean, and we want to thank CARICOM for giving us this opportunity to play this role in facilitating deepening of the regional integration movement. For me, it's an immense personal pleasure. I see myself as a quintessential Caribbean person. My maternal grandfather liked to tell the story of leaving Chimborazo, St. Joseph, traveling light to go to St. Vincent. My mother, in her 70s, heads a project in Trinidad. She asked some questions earlier. I am married to a Barbadian wife with an Anguillian dad who was posted for most of his life in between St. Kitts and St. Martin. So I have lived that Caribbean experience, and it's quite special to me. As the Cave-Hill campus, it gives us extreme pleasure that there is a rebirth and new energy in the regional integration movement. And that pleasure is even more in that it's being led by our own host Prime Minister, the Honorable Mayor Motley. And the campus really wants to congratulate her on putting her substantial political capital behind this movement. She came to office at a time when she should have been justified in saying, I have huge problems at home, I'm going to focus on my problems here. But she's expended a lot of her capital in driving the regional movement. And again, we, as a campus, we commend her for that. The challenges before us are large, but we can't afford to fail. In building this movement, there are going to be many facets, projects big and small. The U.S. did not really become a united country until they had that massive transatlantic Pacific Railway. That's really what allowed them to become a national economy. It's clear that we can't build the movement we need in the region until we can solve transportation problems. The projects might not be the same as that transatlantic railway. It's probably freeing up the data. I mean, I polled students before I came to this forum, and for them, their biggest use is that when I travel in the region, can I use my cell phone? Do I have to worry about my data plan? So the telecommunications piece might be a big element in this time, along with the traditional transportation issues. So again, the night has been long, the discussion has been rich. So thank you, and UWI is thankful for playing a role in this. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. SG, a few closing comments in the absence of the Prime Minister who had an emergency, please.
The Prime Minister just had to take an emergency call. Well, let me start by thanking the audience, those both here and those via the technology, for your participation. I really do mean that when I say thank you, because the questions and your comments have all been heard, and we're going to see how we can distill them to see how we can move forward in our integration arrangement. I also want to thank Professor Robinson for hosting us. As I said earlier, this could not have been a better location to do this. You playing such a big role in bringing us together. As Prime Minister Motley said, and I'm sure she'll say it again in her closing, this is not going to be the last of it. You'll see more of it, you'll hear more of it. It might take different shapes and different forms, and sometimes using more of the technology. I myself have been able to engage with the youth annually using the technology. And there's no reason, without meeting with very few of them in a small room and connecting with them across the region, and there's no reason why we cannot do this with all, not just the youth, but with all. So I'm going to say thank you to all of you, and we'll be seeing again.
Thank you all, and to the Caribbean Development Bank, University of the West Indies, UWI TV, Caribbean Media Corporation, and all the online and television platforms throughout the region who have kept with us faithfully throughout the night. We promise at the CARICOM Secretariat the list of questions that we still have here, food security and all of that, and whether we should have a single CARICOM currency, etc. We'll respond to you on our Facebook page as well. See you at this.
I just want to say 3 words to the Caribbean people. Get on board, because this is our future. So get on board, please.
Have a good night, get home safely, and we'll meet outside for further deliberations.